The old piano had been sitting in the corner of their small living room for as long as anyone could remember. Its dark wood was scratched and worn from years of use, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them too hard. But to 12-year-old David, it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. Every single evening, without fail, his father would come home from his construction job, wash the dust and concrete from his hands, and sit down at that piano bench. His work clothes would still smell like sawdust and sweat, but his fingers would move across those keys like magic. David would rush to finish his homework and dinner, just so he could sit beside his dad on that narrow bench. "Come here, buddy," his father would say, patting the space next to him. "Let's make some music together." David's father had once dreamed of being a professional musician. He used to tell stories about playing jazz in small clubs downtown. It's back when he was young and thought music could pay the bills, but life had other plans? When David was born, his father put away his dreams and picked up a hammer instead. Construction work was steady, reliable, and it put food on the table. But in the evenings, when the world got quiet, the music would come back. "Your hands are getting bigger," his father would notice, gently positioning David's fingers on the keys. "Look, you can reach an octave now. That's 8 keys, son. When I was your age, my hands were too small for that." The lessons weren't formal or structured like the piano classes some of David's friends took at the music school across town. There were no boring scales or strict practice schedules. Instead, his father would play a melody and David would try to copy it. They would laugh when David hit the wrong notes, and his father would show him again, slowly, patiently. Music isn't about being perfect, his father would always say. It's about feeling something and sharing that feeling with others. The wrong notes don't matter if your heart is in the right place. David's mother would watch them from the kitchen doorway while she did the dishes. Sometimes she would smile and shake her head, seeing how similar they were. Both of them would get completely lost in the music, forgetting about everything else around them. The TV could be blaring, the phone could be ringing, but once they started playing, nothing else existed. Winter evenings were David's favorite. The house would be warm and cozy, with the smell of dinner still hanging in the air. His father would teach him new songs, starting with simple melodies and gradually adding more complex parts. David's favorite was when his father would play the bass line with his left hand, while David played the melody with his right. They sounded like a real band. "You're getting really good at this," his father would say, genuine pride in his voice. "Better than I was at your age, that's for sure." "Really?" David would ask, his face lighting up. "Really? You have natural talent, son? But more importantly, you have passion. It's something you can't teach." As months passed, David's skills improved dramatically. His fingers became more confident on the keys, and he started to understand how different combinations of notes could create different emotions. Happy songs, sad songs, exciting songs that made you want to dance, peaceful songs that made you feel calm. One evening in early spring, his father had an idea. "David, how would you feel about playing in your school talent show?" David's eyes went wide. The talent show was a big deal at his school. Kids practiced for months to perform in front of all the parents and teachers. "I don't know, Dad. What if I mess up in front of everyone? Remember what I always tell you about wrong notes?" his father said, putting his arm around David's shoulders. "They don't matter if your heart is in the right place. Besides, I'll help you practice every single day until you feel ready." They spent the next several weeks choosing the perfect piece. David's father had a collection of old sheet music from his jazz days, yellowed pages filled with beautiful melodies. They tried several different songs, but nothing felt quite right until his father pulled out a piece called Clair de Lune. "This one," his father said, his eyes lighting up as he played the opening notes. "This is special. It means moonlight in French. Close your eyes and listen." The melody was hauntingly beautiful, flowing like water and painting pictures in David's mind. It wasn't too fast or too complicated, but it had depth and emotion that made it perfect for someone David's age to really connect with. "It's beautiful, Dad," David whispered when the song ended. "It's going to be our project," his father said. "I'll arrange it so it fits your hands perfectly, and we'll practice it until you can play it in your sleep." From that night on, their evening sessions became more focused. His father would work on small sections with David, making sure each part was comfortable and natural. He would write little notes on the sheet music, reminders about finger positions and timing. "Don't rush. This part," his father would say, pointing to a particularly delicate section. "Let each note breathe. Music needs space between the notes, just like sentences need space between words." David practiced every day, even when his father wasn't home. His mother would hear him working through the difficult passages over and over, never getting frustrated, always trying to make it better. She could see how much this meant to both of them. "He's turning into you," she would tell her husband, completely obsessed with that piano. "There are worse things he could be obsessed with." His father would reply with a smile. As the talent show approached, David's confidence grew. The piece was becoming second nature to him, flowing from his fingers as naturally as breathing. Father had taught him not just the notes, but the story behind the music, the emotions it was meant to convey. "When you play this," his father explained, "imagine you're sitting by a window on a quiet night, looking out at the moon. The music should feel like moonlight looks, soft and peaceful, but also mysterious and beautiful." David understood exactly what his father meant. Every time he played the piece, he could feel that moonlight in his fingers, could see it in his mind. 2 weeks before the talent show, they had their final practice session. David played the entire piece perfectly, his father listening with tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you, son," his father said, pulling David into a tight hug. "You're going to be amazing up there. Everyone's going to see what I see in you every day." "Thanks, Dad," David said, feeling happier than he had ever felt. "I couldn't have done this without you." "We're a team," his father replied. "Always remember. That music brought us together, and it will always connect us, no matter what happens." Looking back, David would remember that evening as one of the most perfect moments of his childhood. The house was quiet, except for the gentle sound of his mother cleaning up in the kitchen. His father's arm was around his shoulders. They both felt the deep satisfaction that comes from working toward something meaningful together. The talent show was just days away. David felt ready. He had no idea that this peaceful evening would be their last together, or that their shared love of music was about to face its greatest test. The morning of the talent show started just like any other Saturday. David woke up early, excited and a little nervous about his performance that evening. He had been dreaming about playing Clair de Lune in front of the whole school, imagining the applause and seeing his parents' proud faces in the audience. He brushed his teeth and got dressed, then quietly walked past his parents' bedroom. The house was unusually still. Usually his father would be up by now, making coffee and reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. But today, their bedroom door was still closed. David went to the kitchen and poured himself a bowl of cereal. He could hear the clock on the wall ticking loudly in the silence. Maybe his parents were sleeping in because it was Saturday. That made sense. His father worked so hard during the week, getting up before sunrise to get to construction sites across town. He practiced the piano. For a little while, playing softly so he wouldn't wake anyone. His fingers moved through the familiar melody of Clair de Lune, but something felt different today. He couldn't quite focus the way he usually did. Maybe it was just nerves about the performance tonight. Around 9 o'clock, David started too. Wonder why his parents were still asleep. His mother was always up early, even on weekends. She liked to get her housework done in the morning so she could relax later. It wasn't like her to sleep this late. He walked back to their bedroom door and listened carefully. Complete silence. No snoring, no movement, nothing. He knocked gently. "Mom, Dad, are you awake?" No answer. David knocked a little louder. "Mom, it's almost 9:30. Still nothing." A strange feeling started growing in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He turned the door handle slowly and pushed the door open just a crack. "Mom," that's when he heard it. Sound he had never heard before and would never forget for the rest of his life. His mother was making a low, horrible, moaning sound like an animal in pain. David pushed the door open wider and saw his mother sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face. She was rocking back and forth, making that terrible sound over and over again. "Mom, what's wrong?" David asked, his voice small and scared. His mother looked up at him, and David saw something in her eyes that made his blood freeze. Her face was completely white, and her eyes looked wild and empty at the same time. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Hey, David, I need you to go to your room right now." "But Mom, what's happening? Where's Dad?" His mother's face crumpled, and she let out a scream that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. It was so loud and full of pain that David stepped backward, bumping into the doorframe. "Mom, please tell me what's wrong," he cried, but she couldn't stop screaming. She was looking at the other side of the bed, where David's father was lying, completely still, his face a color that didn't look right at all. David ran to his father's side of the bed. "Dad! Dad, wake up!" He shook his father's shoulder, but it felt cold and strange under his hand. "Dad!" David shouted, shaking harder. "Dad, you have to wake up! We have the talent show tonight. Remember? We practiced every day." But his father didn't move. His eyes were closed, and his chest wasn't moving up and down like it should be when someone is breathing. David's mother managed to stop, screaming long enough to grab the phone with shaking hands. She dialed 3 numbers, and David heard her talking to someone, but her words didn't make sense to him. She kept saying things like "not breathing" and "cold" and "please hurry." Within minutes, the house filled with strangers. Paramedics rushed into the bedroom with big bags and equipment. They pushed David out of the way and started working on his father. But David could see in their faces that it was too late. One of the paramedics, a kind woman with gray hair, knelt down next to David in the hallway. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "David," he whispered. "David, I'm going to be honest with you, because you're old enough to understand. Your daddy's heart stopped working while he was sleeping. Sometimes that happens to people, and there's nothing anyone could have done to stop it. He didn't suffer or feel any pain. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up." David stared at her, trying to understand what she was saying. "But he can't be gone. We have the talent show tonight. He's supposed to watch me play." The paramedic's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, honey. I know this is the hardest thing you'll ever have to understand." More people started arriving. David's grandmother burst through the front door, crying before she even got inside. His uncle came next, looking shocked and confused. Neighbors started showing up with food and flowers, speaking in hushed voices. David sat on the couch in the living room. Watching all these people move around his house like he was watching a movie, nothing felt real. Every few minutes he would think about the talent show and remember that his father was supposed to be there, sitting in the front row, smiling and proud. His grandmother sat next to him and pulled him close. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. Your daddy loved you so much." "But Grandma, what about tonight? What about the talent show?" She held him tighter. "Honey, you don't need to worry about that right now. Nobody expects you to perform tonight. We need to focus on taking care of your mom and making arrangements for your daddy." The word arrangements didn't mean anything to David, but he would learn soon enough that it meant planning a funeral. It meant choosing a casket and flowers and deciding what clothes his father would wear when they buried him. All afternoon, people came and went. David's mother couldn't stop crying long enough to talk to most of them. She would start to say something and then break down completely. David had never seen his mother like this, and it scared him almost as much as losing. His father, his aunt tried to get him to eat something, but food tasted like cardboard. His cousin offered to play video games with him, but David couldn't concentrate on anything except the talent show that was supposed to happen in just a few hours. Around 4 o'clock, David's teacher called to check on him. His grandmother answered the phone and explained what had happened. David could hear Mrs. Henderson's shocked voice through the phone, expressing sympathy and saying that, of course, David wouldn't be performing tonight. But something inside David rebelled against that idea. He thought about all those evenings sitting at the piano with his father, practicing every single note of Clair de Lune until it was perfect. He thought about his father's proud smile when David finally mastered the difficult parts. He thought about what his father had said just a few nights ago: "Music brought us together, and it will always connect us, no matter what happens." What if this was exactly what his father had meant? What if playing tonight was the most important thing David could do to stay connected to his father? The thought was crazy. Everyone would think he had lost his mind. But as David sat in that house full of crying people and hushed conversations about funeral arrangements, he knew with absolute certainty that he had to play that song tonight. Not for the school, not for the audience, but for his father. It would be his way of saying goodbye. As the afternoon wore on, David's house became even more crowded with relatives and family friends. Everyone spoke in whispers, as if talking too loudly might make the situation worse somehow. The kitchen counter was covered with casseroles and pies that neighbors had brought over, but nobody seemed interested in eating anything. David found himself wandering from room to room, feeling like a stranger in his own home. Adults would stop their conversations when he walked by, giving him those sad, pitying looks that made his stomach turn. He could hear fragments of their discussions about funeral homes and flower arrangements, and who would contact his fathers. Work to let them know what had happened. Around 5 o'clock, David's uncle pulled him aside. "Hey, buddy, why don't you come stay at our house for a few days? Give your mom some space to handle everything she needs to handle." David shook his head. "I want to stay here. I know this is hard, but maybe it would be better if you weren't. Around all this sad stuff right now, you could go rent some movies, order pizza, whatever you want." "I said I want to stay here," David repeated, more firmly this time. His uncle exchanged a look with David's aunt. It's the kind of look adults give each other. When they think a kid is being difficult, but they don't want to argue about it, David escaped to his bedroom, but even there he could hear the constant murmur of voices downstairs. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. This morning he had been a normal 12-year-old boy excited about performing in a talent show. Now, suddenly, he was a kid whose father was dead, and everyone was treating him like he might break into pieces at any moment. He thought about his father lying in that bed, so still and quiet. It didn't seem possible that someone could be there one day and just gone the next. Where did people go when they died? His family wasn't particularly religious, so he didn't have clear answers about heaven or anything like that. All he knew was that his father wasn't coming back. That thought made his chest feel tight and heavy. Around 6 o'clock, David heard his mother crying again downstairs. It was a different kind of crying than before. It's not the shocked screaming from the morning, but a deep, broken sobbing that seemed to go on forever. He crept to the top of the stairs and listened. "I don't know how I'm going to do this," his mother was saying to someone, probably his grandmother. "How am I supposed to raise him by myself? How am I supposed to pay for everything? He was only 42 years old. We were supposed to have more time." David had never heard his mother talk about money worries before. His father had always handled that stuff, sitting on those stairs. David realized that his father's death meant more than just losing the person he loved most in the world. It meant his whole life was about to change in ways he couldn't even understand yet. That's when he heard his grandmother's voice. "What about the talent show tonight? Should someone call the school?" "I already talked to his teacher," his mother replied. "She completely understands. She said they'll just skip his performance and move on to the next act." David felt something hot and angry rise up in his chest. Skip his performance? Move on to the next act? Like all those hours of practice with his father meant nothing? Like their special song was just something that could be forgotten about? He stood up and walked downstairs into the living room, where his mother and grandmother were sitting on the couch. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I want to go too. The talent show tonight." His mother looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "Oh, honey, you don't have to worry about that right now. Everyone understands that you can't perform tonight." "But I want to perform," David said, more loudly than he intended. The room got quiet. His uncle, who had been talking to someone in the kitchen, poked his head into the living room. His aunt, who had been arranging flowers, stopped what she was doing and looked over. "David," his grandmother said gently, "you're upset right now. You're not thinking clearly. Nobody expects you to get up on stage tonight after what happened this morning." "You don't understand," David said, feeling tears starting to build behind his eyes. "Dad and I practiced that song every single day for weeks. He helped me learn every single note. He was so excited to watch me play it." "I know, sweetheart," his mother said, reaching out to touch his hand. "But your father wouldn't want you to put yourself through that tonight. He would want you to stay home with family." David pulled his hand away. "How do you know what he would want? Did you ask him?" The adults all looked at each other again, that same uncomfortable look they'd been giving each other all day. David, his uncle said, using that careful tone adults use when they're trying to be patient with a child, you're in shock right now. You're not thinking about this clearly. Going to that talent show tonight would be too much for you to handle. Am thinking clearly? David said, his voice getting louder. Clearer than I've ever thought about anything? Dad always told me that music connects people, even when they're far apart. What if this is how I stay connected to him? His grandmother stood up and tried to put her arms around him, but David stepped away. You all keep talking about what Dad would want, he said, tears now streaming down his face. But I'm the one who knew him best. I'm the one who sat with him at that piano every single night. I'm the one who learned that song with him, and I know he would want me to play it tonight. His mother's face crumpled again. Oh, David, I can't handle losing you too. What if you get up there and break down? What if it's too much for you? Then I'll break down, David said simply. But at least I'll break down doing something that mattered to Dad. The room was completely silent now. Even the conversations in the kitchen had stopped. David could feel everyone staring at him, trying to figure out what to say to a 12-year-old boy who had just lost his father and was asking to do something that seemed impossible. Finally, his mother spoke. David, honey, the talent show starts in 2 hours. You're not even dressed for it. You haven't eaten anything all day. You're exhausted and emotional, and I don't care about any of that, David interrupted. I only care about playing Dad's song. His uncle tried a different approach. Look, buddy, I understand you want to honor your father's memory, but there will be other opportunities to do that. The funeral, for instance. Maybe you could play something there. David shook his head. The funeral is for everyone else. The talent show is for me and Dad. It's our thing. His aunt spoke up for the first time. What if you played the song here, tonight, for all of us? That way you could still honor your father without having to go through the stress of performing in front of strangers. It's not the same, David said. Dad and I were working toward that performance. It was our goal. If I don't do it tonight, it's like giving up on something we've built together. His mother looked at him for a long moment, and David could see her, trying to understand what he was feeling. Finally, she sighed deeply. If this is really what you want to do, she said quietly, then I won't stop you, but I'm coming with you. And if you change your mind at any point, we're leaving immediately. David felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for understanding. His grandmother shook her head. I think this is a mistake. But I suppose sometimes we have to let children make their own mistakes. David didn't care what anyone else thought. All he knew was that in less than 2 hours he would be sitting at a piano, playing the song he had learned with his father, and maybe, just maybe, his father would somehow be able to hear it. The ride to school felt like the longest car trip of David's life. He sat in the passenger seat, wearing his best dress shirt and tie, the same clothes he had planned to wear to make his father proud. His mother drove in complete silence, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Every few minutes she would glance over at him with worried eyes. Are you sure about this? She asked for the 5th time as they pulled into the school parking lot. David nodded, though his stomach was doing flips. Now that they were actually here, the reality of what he was about to do was hitting him hard. In less than an hour, he would be sitting alone on that stage, playing a song that was supposed to be a celebration, but now felt like something completely different. The school auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Parents were filing in, finding seats and chatting with each other about their kids' performances, as children in costumes were running around backstage, some practicing dance moves, others tuning instruments or doing vocal warm-ups. Everyone seemed so happy and normal. And David felt like he was watching it all from behind a thick glass wall. Mrs. Peterson, the music teacher who was organizing the talent show, spotted David as soon as he walked in. Her face immediately changed from busy and cheerful to concerned and gentle. David's sweetheart, she said, kneeling down to his eye level. I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. You don't need to be here tonight. We've already adjusted the program. I want to perform, David said quietly. Mrs. Peterson looked confused. Are you sure? This has been such a difficult day for you? No one would think less of you if you went home to be with your family. I'm sure, David replied, though His voice was barely above a whisper. Mrs. Peterson looked over at David's mother, who had followed him backstage. Is this really what he wants to do? David's mother nodded slowly. He's been insisting on it all afternoon. I tried to talk him out of it, but his mind is made up. Well, Mrs. Peterson said, still looking uncertain. If you're absolutely sure, then we'll put you back on the program. You're scheduled to go on 7th, right after the dance group from Mrs. Williams' class. David found a quiet corner backstage and sat down on a folding chair. All around him, other kids were laughing and getting ready for their performances. A group of girls were practicing their dance routine one more time. Twin brothers were tuning their guitars. A girl from his class was running through her comedy routine, making her friends giggle. David tried to run through Clair de Lune in his head, but his mind kept wandering. He kept thinking about this morning, about finding his father in bed, about the paramedics and all the crying and all the people in his house talking in whispers. It felt like a million years ago and like it had just happened at the same time. His mother appeared beside him with a bottle of water and a granola bar. You should try to eat something, she said. David took a small bite of the granola bar, but it tasted like cardboard. His mouth was too dry to swallow properly. Mom, he said, looking up at her, what if I forget how to play it? What if I get up there and my mind goes blank? His mother sat down in the chair next to him and took his hand. Honey, you've played that song 100 times. Your fingers know every note by heart. But if you forget, or if you need to stop, or if you change your mind completely, that's okay too. We can leave any time you want. David squeezed her hand. He had never loved his mother more than he did in that moment, seeing how scared she was for him but still supporting his decision. The talent show began, and David could hear the audience applauding for each act. A kindergartner sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and got huge cheers. The dance group performed to a popular song and had everyone clapping along. The twin brothers played a rock song that made the audience whistle and shout. David's turn was getting closer. He could feel his heart beating faster and faster. His hands were sweating and he kept wiping them on his pants.
Oh, David Thompson, you're...
Up next, Mrs. Peterson said, appearing at his side. David stood up on shaky legs. His mother gave him a quick hug. I love you, she whispered in his ear. Your father would be so proud of you. David walked toward the stage entrance, past all the other kids who were still waiting for their turns. Some of them looked at him curiously, probably wondering why he looked so serious when everyone else was having fun. Mrs. Peterson took the microphone on stage. Our next performer is David Thompson, who will be playing Clair de Lune on the piano. David heard the polite applause from the audience as he walked across the stage to the piano bench. The stage lights were bright and warm, and for a moment, he couldn't see anything beyond the first few rows of seats. He sat down and adjusted the bench, just like his father had taught him to do. That's when he saw his mother in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of love and worry. David placed his hands on the piano keys and tried to steady his breathing. This was it. This was the moment he and his father had been working toward for weeks. But his father wasn't in the audience watching proudly. His father would never see him perform anything ever again. The thought hit him like a punch to the stomach. And suddenly David couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They started streaming down his face as he sat there at the piano with hundreds of people watching him and waiting for him to play. The auditorium got very quiet. David could feel everyone staring at him, probably wondering what was wrong with this kid who was crying before he even started playing. He took a shaky breath and tried to wipe his eyes. But the tears just kept coming. His vision was blurry, and he could barely see the piano keys through the tears. But then, somehow he heard his father's voice in his head. As clear as if he was sitting right there on the bench beside him. Remember what I always tell you about wrong notes? They don't matter if your heart is in the right place. David's hands found the opening chord of Clair de Lune, and he began to play. His technique wasn't perfect. His hands were shaking, and his tears were falling onto the keys. But as the beautiful melody filled the silent auditorium, something magical happened. The music seemed to take on a life of its own, carrying all of David's love for his father, all of his grief, all of his memories of those precious evenings they had spent together at their old piano at home. The audience was completely still. Not a single person moved or made a sound. Even the little kids, who usually got restless during performances, sat perfectly quiet, somehow understanding that they were witnessing something special. David played every note his father had taught him, pouring his whole heart into the melody. And for those few minutes, it felt like his father was right there with him, guiding his fingers, sharing this moment they had worked so hard to create together. When the last note faded into silence, the auditorium remained quiet for several long seconds. Then, slowly, the applause began, building into something David had never heard before, not just clapping, but a recognition of something profound and moving and real. The applause that followed David's performance was unlike anything anyone in that auditorium had ever experienced. It wasn't the polite clapping that usually greeted student performances, or even the enthusiastic cheering that came after particularly impressive acts. This was something deeper, something that seemed to come from the very souls of everyone who had witnessed what just happened. David sat at the piano bench for a moment, still trembling, unsure if he should stand up or bow or just run off the stage. His face was still wet with tears, and he felt completely drained, like he had just poured every bit of energy he had into those few minutes of music. Mrs. Peterson appeared beside him, her own eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything, just placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and helped him stand up. The applause continued as David walked across the stage, and he noticed that many of the adults in the audience were wiping their eyes. Backstage, the other kids who were waiting to perform looked at David with a mixture of awe and confusion. They could tell that something extraordinary had just happened, but most of them were too young to fully understand what it was. David's mother was waiting for him in the wings. She immediately pulled him into the tightest hug of his life. She was crying too, but these were different tears than the ones she had been shedding all day. These seemed to be tears of pride, mixed with grief. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into his ear. So proud. Your father would have been amazed." "I do okay?" David asked, suddenly feeling uncertain. "I was crying the whole time. I probably messed up some of the notes." "You were perfect," his mother said firmly. "You were absolutely perfect." Word about David's performance spread quickly through the small auditorium. During the intermission, between acts, people kept approaching his mother to express their condolences and to tell her how moved they had been by David's courage. Many of them had no idea what had happened that morning, but they could feel the raw emotion in his playing. Mrs. Johnson, who lived 3 houses down from David's family, came over with tears in her eyes. "I had no idea about your husband," she said to David's mother. "What that boy just did up there, I've never seen anything like it." The way he played that song, it was like he was speaking directly to his father. Mr. Rodriguez, David's math teacher, shook David's hand with genuine respect. "That took real courage, son," he said. "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen a student show that kind of strength." But it was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had been a piano teacher for most of her life, who said something that stuck with David forever. She knelt down to his eye level and took his hands in her weathered ones. "Young man," she said in her soft, accented voice, "I have heard thousands of students play piano over the years. Some were technically perfect. Some were very talented. But tonight, you showed me what music is really for. Music is not about perfect technique or impressive skill. Music is about sharing what's in your heart with other people. And tonight, you shared your love for your father with all of us." As the second half of the talent show continued, David found himself thinking about those words. He had always thought music was about playing the right notes at the right time. His father had taught him about technique and timing and expression. But until tonight, David had never really understood that music could be a way to communicate feelings that were too big and complicated for regular words. After the show ended, several families approached David and his mother in the parking lot. Some of them shared their own stories of loss, telling David about grandparents or other relatives they had lost, and how his performance had reminded them of their own grief and love. One father, a man David didn't recognize, stopped them as they were walking to their car. "My dad died when I was about your age," he told David. I wish I had been brave enough to do something like what you did tonight. You honored your father in the most beautiful way possible. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ride to school had been. The silence felt peaceful instead of tense. David stared out the window at the familiar streets of his neighborhood, feeling exhausted but also somehow lighter than he had felt all day. When they got home, the house was still full of relatives, but the atmosphere had changed. David's grandmother, who had been so worried about him performing, greeted him with a hug and told him she had been wrong to doubt his decision. Your grandfather would have done the same thing, she said. He always said that music was the best way to say goodbye to someone you love. Over the next few days, as the family planned the funeral and dealt with all the difficult arrangements that come after someone dies, David found himself thinking often about that moment on stage. The funeral itself was sad and overwhelming, filled with flowers and formal speeches and lots of crying. But somehow, David felt like he had already said his real goodbye to his father during those few minutes at the piano. The weeks that followed were hard in ways David hadn't expected. The house felt too quiet without his father's presence. The piano sat silent in the corner of the living room, and for a while, David couldn't bring himself to play it. Everything reminded him of his father: the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of construction trucks driving by, even the evening news that his father used to watch. But about a month after the funeral, David found himself drawn back to the piano. He sat down at the bench and played Clair de Lune again, softly, just for himself. And somehow, it felt like his father was there with him again. Not in a scary or supernatural way, but in the way that love continues even after someone is. Gone Mrs. Peterson approached David and his mother about joining the school's advanced music program. She had been thinking about what happened at the talent show, and she believed David had a special gift that deserved to be nurtured. What he did that night, she explained to his mother, showed me that he understands music on a level that can't be taught. That kind of emotional connection to music is rare, and it should be developed. David ended up taking piano lessons throughout middle school and high school, performed in many more concerts and competitions over the years, and he won several awards for his technical skill. But he never forgot that the most important performance of his life was the one where he cried through the entire song and probably made more mistakes than he ever had before. Years later, when David was in college studying music, he would tell people that he learned more about what music really means in those 5 minutes on stage after his father died than in all his formal lessons combined. Music, he came to understand, isn't just about entertainment or showing off technical ability. Music is about connection, connecting with other people, connecting with emotions that are too deep for words, and sometimes connecting with people we love even after they're gone. And whenever David performed Clair de Lune in the years that followed, he would think about his father and remember that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to express itself. Sometimes through trembling fingers on piano keys. Sometimes through tears that fall while beautiful music fills the air. And sometimes through the courage to share your broken heart with a room full of strangers who become, for just a few minutes, a little less alone in their own grief and love.